This is the ultimate historical figures iceberg. It is one of the most comprehensive iceberg charts that exist on the internet. With almost 10,000 entries, it covers basically everyone who has had at least some influence in human history that you could possibly think of. This iceberg goes through many layers, with the very top of the iceberg containing some of the most prominent figures in human history, and as we go down the list, the individuals become less known and more obscure. In these videos, we will be talking about each and every individual, their life story oversimplified, and what they're known for. The rules for this iceberg are that the individual must be deceased, they must be a real person who has existed, so no fictional characters. This includes individuals from folk tales or mythology, and lastly, they must be human, therefore no animals are on the list. This is part 1 of many in this iceberg series, where we will venture down this expansive list of influential historical figures, so stick around, grab some popcorn, and subscribe so you won't miss any new videos. Before we continue, all credit goes to Kadevo86 or Gotta Improve Math on Reddit, the creator of this iceberg. Now, with all that said, let's dive into it. Tier 1. The 2 most influential people in history. Jesus. We first begin with who most people would call the most influential person in history, Jesus of Nazareth. His story began when Angel Gabriel visited Mary, the mother of Jesus, who told her that she was the chosen by God and that her child would be conceived by the Holy Spirit and would birth the supposed Son of God, named Jesus. The purpose of his birth being that it would bring salvation to humanity, Jesus was born around 4 BCE in Bethlehem to Mary and Joseph. He grew up in Nazareth in Galilee, where he worked in his family trade as a carpenter, following in his father's footsteps. Little else is known about his early life other than the fact that he was a devout Jewish and partook in religious practices. His defining moment came when he was 30 and when he was baptized by John the Baptist. This event marked the beginning of his role as a public ministry. Following this, he began preaching about the kingdom of God, forgiveness, and love, gaining followers who believed he was the long-awaited Messiah. His ministry was characterized by miracles, parables, and healing, included feeding the masses and restoring the blind and lame. There were many major and famous events in Jesus' life, such as the 40-day temptation in the desert with Satan, Jesus walking on water, the Sermon on the Mount, and much more. But the most important series of events began with the Last Supper. It was the final meal that Jesus shared with his 12 disciples. At this meal, Jesus foretold his betrayal, arrest, and impending death. He broke bread and shared wine with his disciples, which symbolized his body and blood. Jesus also revealed that one of his disciples has betrayed him, who turned out to be Judas. Judas led Roman soldiers and Jewish authorities to Jesus after the Last Supper, where he was captured. It turned out Jesus was wanted by the Jewish religion authorities because they saw him as a threat due to his growing influence. He was accused of blasphemy and was sentenced to death by crucifixion, which is a common method of execution at the time, by Pontius Pilate. After being nailed to a cross, he died and his body was taken to a womb. 3 days later, he was resurrected. This event was known as the resurrection and symbolized Jesus' victory over sin. Jesus appeared before his disciples over the period of 40 days before he ascended to heaven. Upon his death, his disciples spread his teachings across the Roman Empire, and to this day, the religion Christianity, which has developed through Jesus' teachings, has risen to 2.4 billion followers, making him one of the most influential people in all of human history. Muhammad. Muhammad, alongside Jesus, is also called one of the most influential people in all of human history. He is known as the last prophet of Islam and was key to founding the Islamic religion. His story began when he was born in 570 CE in Mecca, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia. He was born into a powerful merchant clan. However, most of his early life was marked by hardship and he was orphaned at a young age. He was raised by his grandfather and then later his uncle. As time passed, he went from working as a shepherd to becoming a respected merchant. When he was 25, he married to Khadija, a wealthy widow who provided him with wealth, stability, and respect within the Meccan society. Growing up, living in a hardship and as a merchant, he was exposed to religions ideas such as Christianity and Judaism, and his dissatisfaction with social injustice led him down the path to becoming a religion leader. The critical moment in Muhammad's life came in 610 CE at 40 years old, when the angel Gabriel appeared before him in the cave of Hira. This was when he received his first revelation, which marked his beginning as a prophet. Over the next 23 years, he would receive a series of revelations that would eventually form the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. 12 years after his first revelation in 622 CE, Muhammad and his followers migrated from Mecca to Medina to escape persecution. This event is known as the Hijra, marked the start of the Islamic calendar, which is primarily used to determine the proper days of Islamic holidays and rituals. In Medina, Muhammad united the various tribes to the Constitution of Medina. By December, after 8 years of conflict with the Meccan tribes, Muhammad assembled an army of 10,000 Muslim converts and led a march towards Mecca. The fight went largely uncontested, and Muhammad took back the city with minimal casualties. In 632, shortly after returning from the farewell pilgrimage where he delivered his famous farewell sermon, he became ill and died. His influence is still present to this day, given by the fact there are 1.8 billion followers of Islam. He transformed Arab society by introducing monotheism, moral accountability, and social reforms, making him one of the most influential people in all of human history. Tier 2. Other key figures of major world religions. Buddha. Let's talk about a man named Siddhartha Gautama, who was born in 563 BCE in a place called Lumbini, which is now present-day Nepal. Siddhartha was born into a royal family. His dad was a king, so he grew up as a prince. Siddhartha Gautama essentially lived in luxury growing up. His parents gave him the best life possible, making sure he never saw anything bad or sad. They wanted him to stay happy forever, but that wasn't how life worked. As Siddhartha grew older, he started to wonder what the world outside the palace was like. So one day, he went on a trip to see what was out there. What he saw changed his life forever. For the first time, he saw an old man, someone sick, and even a dead person. The sight hit him hard. He had never known people could suffer so much. Then, he saw a peaceful monk who had given up everything to find happiness in a simple life. That's when Siddhartha made a decision. He left his palace, his riches, and his family behind. He was determined to figure out why people suffer and how they could be happy. Siddhartha didn't have it easy after leaving the palace. He tried every method to find the answer, studying with wise teachers, fasting for days, and meditating. For 6 long years, he searched for answers, but nothing seemed to work. Then, one day, he sat under a tree, which is now known as the Bodhi tree, and promised himself he wouldn't move until he figured it out. After meditating for days, it finally came to him. The problem was that people suffer because they are always wanting more. They want things to last forever, but they don't. He realized that the way to be happy wasn't by having everything or giving up everything. It was by following a middle path, not too much, not too little. This moment, called the Enlightenment, made Siddhartha the Buddha, which literally means the enlightened one. He found the key to peace and happiness, sharing his wisdom, but Buddha didn't keep his wisdom to himself. He spent the rest of his life traveling and teaching others what he had learned. He taught about the 4 noble truths, which were the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. Basically, that life is full of challenges, but there's a way to find peace. He also taught the Eightfold Path, a guide for how people should live, like being kind, thinking wisely, and focusing on what matters. People loved listening to Buddha because his message was simple and made sense. You didn't have to be rich or powerful to follow his teachings. Slowly, more and more people followed Buddha's path, and his teachings began to spread far and wide. For his whole life, he spent traveling the world and spreading his message. Buddha lived a long life and passed away at the age of 80 at around 483 BCE, after teaching thousands of people how to live peacefully. But even though he was gone, his ideas didn't disappear. In fact, they grew even stronger. His followers kept spreading his message, and to this day, the religion Buddhism, which stemmed from his ideas, amassed to nearly 520 million followers. He taught that life will always have challenges, but if we learn to let go of always wanting more, we can find happiness in what we have. His lessons on kindness, mindfulness, and balance have made the world a better place, and his influence continues to grow, making him in Tier 2 a fitting placement. Confucius. Next, let's dive into the life of Confucius, one of the most famous teachers in history and the founder of the now major religion, Confucianism. Confucius was born in 551 BCE, which was coincidentally around the same era as Buddha, in a small village called Chufu in ancient China. His full name was Kong Chiu, and he came from a family that was once noble, but by the time he was born, they had fallen on hard times. His father, a soldier who was much older than his mother, died when Confucius was only 3 years old, leaving his family poor. Even though life was tough, Confucius has a thirst for knowledge and was always curious. He worked hard and became well educated, reading every book he could get his hands on, learning about things such as history, poetry, and music. Growing up, Confucius saw a lot of chaos in China. Back then, it was common for conflict to be this rampant. The country was divided into different regions, and warlords were constantly fighting for power. Families were breaking apart, and society felt like it was falling apart too. This made Confucius think deeply about how people should live together in peace. He believed that if people followed certain moral rules and respected each other, society could be better. He didn't just want people to behave well on the outside, but he thought that they should develop good character inside. As Confucius grew older, he became a teacher, and his teachings focused on how to live a good and honest life. He believed that people should respect their elders, care for their family, and be kind to others. These ideas might seem like common sense to us, but back in Confucius's time, these ideas weren't as widely practiced or organized into a clear philosophy. Confucius didn't think of himself as a religious leader. Instead, he focused on ethics, like how people should treat each other and the importance of education. His idea was that if you become a better person, you help make the world around you better too. In his lifetime, Confucius traveled a lot, hoping to spread his ideas. He worked as a government official, but he wasn't always successful in convincing rulers to follow his teachings. He wanted them to govern by setting a good example instead of using force or fear. While Confucius tried to influence leaders, many of them weren't interested in his advice. After several years, he went back to teaching and gathered a group of students who learned from him and carried on his ideas. Confucius died in 479 BCE, so when he was 72 years old. At the time, he wasn't widely recognized, but his followers kept teaching what he had taught them. Over time, his ideas grew more and more important. Even after his death, people realized that his teachings could help guide both individuals and governments. His teachings were collected into a book called the Analects, which became a key text for learning about his ideas. What made Confucius' ideas stand out was his belief that people could learn to be better through education and self-reflection. This was different from many other philosophers that focused on power or punishment to keep order. Confucius realized that true leaders should be moral examples, and that if people followed these examples, society would be harmonious. One of his now most famous sayings, "Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself," which sounds a lot like the golden rule many people follow today. Confucius is still massively influential today because his ideas are timeless. To us, it seems rather absurd that someone became this influential by teaching basic moral principles that we all assume is simply common sense, such as living a life of respect, fairness, and kindness. But remember, it's likely that these ideas are so common now because of the long-term effects of his influence over 2,500 years ago. The fact that his ideas are so universal and can apply to anyone from anywhere are what makes his influence easily land in Tier 2. Laozi. Up next we have Laozi, or Laozi, whose name means old master. He's one of the most important figures in Chinese philosophy, and he's quite literally known as a legend in ancient Chinese history. He was born around the 6th century BCE in the state of Chu, which is now part of modern-day China. Although his exact birth date is unknown and up for debate, some say he was born as early as 571 BCE. Laozi came from a humble background. While there's not much information about his early life, what we do know is that he worked as a keeper of the archives at the Zhou Dynasty court, which basically means that he was responsible for taking care of and organizing important documents, books, and records for the government. This job gave him access to many ancient writings and wisdom, which helped form his ideas later on. His background as a record keeper allowed him to study history, culture, and different philosophies. All these ancient texts and teachings basically gave him ultimate wisdom and a unique understanding of how life, society, and nature work together. His job might not have always been exciting, but it gave him the knowledge that would one day lead to him creating Taoism, one of the most important philosophies/religions in China. He is most famous for writing the Tao Te Ching, a short but powerful book of wisdom that talks about how to live a simple, peaceful life in harmony with nature. The story goes that he was frustrated with the growing corruption and chaos in society and decided to leave the city and travel west to live in solitude. As he was about to leave, a gatekeeper named Yin Qi recognized him as a wise man and asked him to write down his teachings before disappearing from society. Here, a gatekeeper refers to someone who worked at a city gate, controlling who could enter or leave the city. In ancient times, cities often had large walls with gates to protect them from invaders or unwanted visitors. Laozi agreed and wrote the Tao Te Ching, which explains that philosophy of the Tao, or the Way. This book talks about how the world works in a natural flow, and how we should live with simplicity, humility, and in balance with the universe. After writing the book, Laozi continued his journey, and no one knows for sure what happened to him after that. Some stories say he became a hermit, living a quiet life away from society, but these are just mere speculations. Laozi's teachings were different because they focused on the Wu Wei, which means non-action or going with the natural flow of life. While other philosophers talked about strict rules or how to control behavior, he simply thought that trying to force things would only lead to problems. Instead, he taught that people should follow the natural rhythms of the universe and not fight against them. This idea of letting things happen naturally was revolutionary at the time and set him apart from other thinkers. As mentioned, one of Laozi's biggest contributions to the world is the Tao Te Ching. This book has only about 5,000 Chinese characters, but is packed with wisdom on how to live a balanced and meaningful life. Some of the key ideas in the book include the Tao, the way of the universe, or the natural order of things, the famous yin and yang, the idea that opposites like light and dark, strong and weak, exist together and balance each other out. Wu Wei, the practice of not forcing things and allowing life to flow naturally. These ideas were so simple, yet such a different way of thinking back then that they changed how people thought about life, power, and nature. He was quite literally on a different level when it came to his perspective on how the world functioned. These ideas became the foundation of what now famous religion Taoism. one of China's three main religions alongside Confucianism and Buddhism. And like these other two religions, Laozi's ideas still have a timeless influence on society. Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak was born on April 15th, 1469. Yeah, you heard that right, not 1469 BCE. Compared to the other major religions, Guru Nanak's story was probably the most recent one. To note, at this point in time, most of the other religions had been nearly/fully established. He was born into a village called Rai Boi Ki Talwandi, which is now in Pakistan and is now known as Nankani Sahib. His parents were named Mehta Kalu and Mehta Tripta, and even though they were part of the Hindu community, Nanak wasn't like the other kids. From a young age, it was clear that he was different. He was super curious, always asking extremely philosophical questions about life, God, and why people treated each other differently. His father wanted him to get into business. Nanak's heart was drawn to understanding the world from a deeper perspective. Instead of just going along with what everyone else was doing, Nanak spent a lot of time thinking about why people were separated by religion, caste, and social status. For some context, caste is a system in India that divided people into different groups based on their family background. It's like a rule that says if you're born into a certain group, you have to do certain jobs and live a certain way. Some people, because of their caste, were treated better. He believed that everyone was equal and that there was only one God for all. This way of thinking made him different and set him on a path to becoming one of the most important spiritual leaders ever. One of the most famous moments in Nanak's life was when he was around 30 years old. One morning, Nanak went down to the river to bathe, something he did regularly, but this time he didn't come back. He disappeared for 3 days. People thought he had drowned, but then, on the third day, he returned with a glowing face and a message. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. What he meant was that people shouldn't be divided by their religion. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. This experience changed Nanak forever. From that moment, he started traveling around, spreading the message that God is one, and that kindness and love matter more than rituals or labels. This simple but bold idea set him apart from others and attracted many followers. So what made Guru Nanak different from other spiritual leaders? It was his belief in equality. Back then, society was divided into strict categories. Some people were considered better or more important just because of their family, religion, or social class. Clearly, the idea of equality was foreign, but Nanak rejected all of that. He didn't care if someone was rich or poor, Hindu or Muslim. He saw everyone as equal. This was a big deal because not many people were teaching this at the time. He started the tradition of Iyengar, a free kitchen where people from all backgrounds could sit together and eat the same meal. A commonly practiced tradition to this day that simply expressed that everyone was equal no matter what. Guru Nanak passed away on September 22nd, 1539, but his legacy didn't stop there. Although he created the foundation for Sikhism, it was expanded by the 9 gurus, who were essentially successors to Guru Nanak, who continued to build on his ideas. The principles he laid out, like equality, hard work, and service, are still followed by millions of Sikhs today. His holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib, is a collection of his teachings and the wisdom of other spiritual leaders, making sure his message of equality remains timeless. Zoroaster. Zoroaster, also known as Zarathustra, was born sometime between 1500 and 1000 BCE, though no one knows the exact date. He came from ancient Persia, which we now call Iran. He grew up in a family of priests, so from a young age, he learned about all the religious rituals and beliefs of this time. But something about it didn't sit right with him. As Zoroaster grew older, he began to wonder, why do people worship so many gods? And why is there so much conflict and greed in the world? Instead of just accepting things as they were, Zoroaster set out on a spiritual adventure to find the truth. He spent years studying, thinking, and asking deep philosophical questions that at the time others wouldn't dare. One day, when Zoroaster was 30 years old, something extraordinary happened. While he was praying at a river, he had a divine vision. He saw Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light and goodness. In this vision, Ahura Mazda revealed that he was the one true God, and that the world was a battleground between good and evil forces. This moment changed Zoroaster's life forever. He now knew that his mission was to teach people that they had a choice. They could follow the path of light, truth, and goodness with Ahura Mazda, or they could follow the path of lies and darkness. He called this choice between good and evil the Great Struggle. Zoroaster didn't keep this knowledge to himself. He was determined to spread it to the world, although it wasn't going to be easy. At first, not many people wanted to hear what he had to say. His teachings were different from the old ways, and that made people very uncomfortable. He was telling them that they didn't need to sacrifice to multiple gods anymore, and that they should focus on living a life of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. People didn't understand this right away, and for years, Zoroaster struggled to find followers. But he never gave up. His message was too important. Eventually, after many years of spreading his teachings, he found a powerful supporter, King Vishtaspa, who ruled a region of Persia. The king was so moved by Zoroaster's wisdom that he converted to Zoroastrianism, the religion that Zoroaster founded with his teachings, making it the official religion of his kingdom. This was a huge help for Zoroaster's quest to get followers, and soon his teachings began to spread all across Persia. As he grew older, his influence spread. More and more people followed his teachings, which became known as Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster lived a long life, but like every great story, his came to an end. He passed away when he was 77 years old. There are different stories about how he died. Some say he was killed during an invasion by a rival tribe, but no one really knows. His ideas were revolutionary. He believed that humans had free will, the ability to choose between good and evil, and that every action we take matters. This focus on personal responsibility set him apart from other spiritual leaders of his time. Remember that this was nearly 3,000 years ago. Many spiritual leaders at the time believed in multiple gods, that these gods controlled our fate, and that performing rituals to please these gods were more important than focusing on choosing between morally good and bad. The foundation of his religion, Zoroastrianism, was one of the world's first monotheistic religions, meaning a religion that believes in one God. This was way before the introduction of Christianity, Islam, and all the other religions discussed so far. He introduced the concept of a battle between good and evil that we see in many religions today. Zoroastrianism's idea on moral behavior, like choosing the right path, had a massive influence on not just ancient Persia, but it's possible it also had an influence on the foundation for future religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Anyways, that's it for part 1. We were able to cover all the people in tiers 1 and 2. Make sure to subscribe so you can stick around for the next part of this iceberg. Up next, we'll be diving into tier 3 of historical figures such as Paul the Apostle, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, and much more. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment down below on who you were most excited to see in this long series, and we'll see you again next time.